Okay, thank you. So we'll give a brief overview of the processing, and maybe actually, Bruno, you should go first, and I will switch to slide number 1.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, HR-VPP products, so the high resolution vegetation and productivity products. I think this is more or less what Ludwig already represented, but now in a schematic way. So we are part of the pan-European land monitoring, Copernicus Land Monitoring Service. So you can find us under the biophysical parameters, and if you zoom into the biophysical parameters, there are two product suites. So one is the snow and ice monitoring, the other one is for vegetation and state and evolution of the land surface monitoring. So all these products are across the EEA 39, and you see the link there below to get to the products. Yeah, next slide. So the product suite consists, so we call it not an HR-VPP product, but a product suite. Why? Because there are different parts in there. Yeah, you can click on the next one. So the first is we have basic vegetation indices. So 4 vegetation indices which are processed daily from the Sentinel-2 A and B level 1C data. So they are delivered at a daily basis and currently is operated in near real time. So they are delivered within the 12 hours. And currently we have kind of an average time that we deliver around 9 hours after the availability of the data, or the input data. So the full data set is covered from October 2016 onwards till today. Then the second product in the suite is seasonal trajectories. So they are 10 daily products which are delivered in March of every year. So they are derived from the plant phenology index, but I think Lars will explain that a bit more in depth later on. And then the third part is the actual phenology and productivity parameters, so the VPP parameters for two seasons, which are delivered at a yearly temporal frequency, also in March of every year after the season, basically after the seasons here. So you can see also in the vertical part that the data is delivered in the Sentinel-2 UTM tile grid, so at all at 10-meter resolution. But for the seasonal trajectories and the VPP parameters, we also transform them into an EPSG 3035 grid, so the LAE projection, as it's known, European projection in 10 meter as well as in 100 meter. Yeah, that's it, Lars. Now I think it's back to you.
Okay, so the two keywords here are phenology and productivity. And as you all probably know, the phenology is the timing of the development of photosynthetically active leaf foliage. And it's those things that we see in the spring and summer and autumn, the bud setting, the flowering, the leaf growth, the leaf shedding, and so on and so forth. But of course, we have to realize that these relate to internal plant processes, and they are affected by a number of external factors like the light, the temperature, the water, and so on. And we can view this as the leaf canopy being sort of on a trajectory to develop through time. And from this trajectory, we can pick out certain phenological stages or phenological parameters. The productivity can be said to be the accumulation of vegetation biomass over the growing season. It denotes, of course, the plant growth, and it's usually measured as gross or net primary productivity, GPP or NPP, and it's affected by the vegetation, vigor, and health. So we have used two key biophysical parameters in estimating these factors. It's the leaf area index, which is the single-sided leaf surface area per ground area. And it's the FAPAR, the absorption of photosynthetically active radiation of the plant canopy. So these two are related in a non-linear fashion. And we can say that they represent two complementary views on the plant canopy development. We can estimate those types of factors in many different ways. From satellite observations, we can use models, or we can use vegetation indices. We have here used the DVI, since it's nearly linear with FAPAR, and we have used another vegetation index called PPI, or Plant Phenology Index, which is nearly linear with green leaf area index. Here is a slide showing the differences in those two. They are correlated, but they also show quite different aspects of vegetation. And in that sense, they are complementary, we can say. Here are some comparisons of different indices for a tile over Belgium. We have the NDVI at the top, and then FAPAR, PPI, and leaf area index at the bottom. And we can see here their development over 3 years in time. They are correlated. The NDVI and the FAPAR are quite well, strongly correlated. And the PPI and the leaf area index are also quite strongly correlated. But what we can see here is that if we want to pick out the seasonal development of vegetation, the PPI shows a much clearer signal than the other indices. So we have stuck with the PPI. We've also used a number of other calibration data sets in order to finally decide on our methodology and on the vegetation indices to use. We used GPP from eddy covariance, flux towers over Europe. We used images from phenological cameras, phenocams, from a number of sites across Europe. We used data from manual field observations of ground phenology, so human observers, from the PEP 725 ground data set. And then we complemented with observations from several agricultural fields in Belgium and Austria. And this methodology has been published in the scientific literature. You can see a reference at the bottom of the slide. So here we can see a simplified seasonal trajectory and some parameters. So we have the dots being the original data observation from the satellite, in our case Sentinel-2. And then we have the dashed line being the seasonal trajectory. And every 10 days, we can pick out the value of this trajectory, and we can also define the seasonality parameters. Here we have an animation showing every 10-day the PPI, the plant phenology index, and how it varies over an agricultural area. And you can see that it both represents the difference between different cropping fields, but also difference within cropping fields, and providing many different details about the vegetation canopy. So these seasonal trajectories can be relatively complex in shape. They can be narrow or wide or have different shapes, and they have been defined by a start and an end of the growing season. So looking at the simplified graph again, we have the start and the end of the growing season, but we also have a number of other parameters, like the length of the season, the amplitude, the seasonal integrals, and so on and so forth. We can now look at some of the data in the data portal. And we are here viewing the whole of Europe. This is the total vegetation productivity, so one of the parameters that I have selected for 2019. And let's zoom in over the Alps. So zooming in, we can start to see the sort of general shape of the landscape, actually, from the productivity of the vegetation. So in red colors, we have low productivity, and in green and blue colors, we have high productivity areas. Let's zoom in a little bit more, and now we are closing in, and we can start to see the landscape details. We have the mountain tops with very low productivity, and we have the high productivity valleys, sort of creating a fascinating scenery over this area. So let's zoom a little bit more, and now we are closing in on the valley and really seeing those productive and also less productive areas. And finally, we can zoom in one more time and see the fine details of the agricultural landscape over this township. We see some high productive fields and some fields that are not being harvested or planted for the time being. So you can see the tremendous detail that we have in these data. And if we look at all the different parameters that we have generated, we have the several parameters presenting the start of the season, the end of the season, the length of the season, so when the seasons occur. And then we have the values, the maximum values, and when this maximum peak value occurs. We have the different slopes of this seasonal curve. We have the amplitude of this curve, and we have the integrals presenting the seasonal and the total productivity. And we also have a layer representing the quality for each pixel in the scene. We can now take this data and enter them into a GIS system and relatively easy extract some statistics. In this case, I used Korean land cover. And from this one, we can see that, for example, the broadleaf forest is one of the classes that has highest total productivity of these classes in the area. Pastures also highly productive classes. So let's again look at this area over Lake Como, and we have here overlaid with the topography, and it's the start of the season date in 2019. So in red colors, we have very early dates in March. So this is when the vegetation starts to grow. And then in blue colors, we have dates around July. And we can see how this sort of follows nicely when we proceed up the hill to the highest areas. And if we extract a profile, we can look at the values across this profile and see how the values increase almost linearly over this profile, but with some local variations depending on the local topography. And actually over this area, when we ascend 1 kilometer, that means that we are delaying the start of the growing season by 22 days in this case. So that's one example of a kind of analysis that we can do using these data. Here is the end of the growing season. Here is the total productivity, dependent quite strongly on the vegetation type or the crop type in this area. And here is the total cropland productivity. And this is now not for Italy any longer, but it's for South Sweden. And we can see the difference between 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. And what stands out here are the low values in 2020 for these croplands. And as most of you probably know, we had a very severe drought over Northern Europe in that year, and that severely affected the productivity of the crop fields. So I will just very briefly mention a little bit about the technology, but I think some of that will be, you will hear many more details about this later on. Anyway, the system is hosted on the Wekeo DIAS, so that's the cloud service that we use for both the processing and also for the presentation of the data. So from the Wekeo service, it's possible to download all these products that we have generated. And as Bruno mentioned, it's 3 product groups and 31 product types. And we have now generated 5 years of data, and we are going to 6 years in 2023, beginning of 2023. And you can see in this table that we have very large amounts of data that are being generated yearly. We have generated a number of documents that describe the products. So for a beginner, it would be useful to start with the product users manual. We have one for the vegetation indices and one for the phenological products. If you want more detail, you can go to these algorithmic details documents that describe every technical detail basically that we have gone through to generate these. We also have a description of the calibration process that we went through. And then we have a number of reports that present the validation results from the independent validation team that carried out and continue to carry out sort of checks on the general validity of our products. We have some data access manuals as well, one for accessing the data sort of by human use, looking and clicking. And then we will have another manual coming soon about machine-to-machine data transfer. We have also generated some white papers on different use cases, one on local drought and one on biomass, and I think they will be presented next week or something like that. And then we have some upcoming reports, one on biodiversity, one on agriculture. And these are all examples of how the data can be used to sort of inspire more uses. But of course, it's possible to use this data in many different ways. And I hope we will see today a number of examples of how this can be done. So I think that was probably my last slide, and I will just say thank you for listening.